else. They want people to be intellectually intimidated by them.
Right.
I'm not easily intellectually intimidated. I can be.
It's the accent.
But I can assure you it's more than that.
It's partly the accent.
No, I can assure you it's more than that. It's a hell of a lot more.
Michael Malice, you are an absolute gem, and we are so lucky to have you. The following clips are from interviews and podcasts that he has done. If you'd like to see them in full, I'll put a link in the description. But until then, enjoy the gem of Michael Malice.
That there always is in the U.S. and, very notoriously, this is the only quote from Eisenhower that people know. He warned about the military-industrial complex. There is an enormous amount of profit to be made and a lot of power to be gained when a nation is at war. It does well for the president in terms of approval ratings. The nation rallies around, and in times of conflict, they get to go to the funerals and look at heroes with all these coffins that didn't need to be there. You get to kind of seem strong. So there is an enormous incentive for Washington to have war. And in case people think, oh, you're talking crazy, keep in mind that last summer we killed a bunch of kids in Afghanistan. And not only did no one apologize, no one was even fired for it. Human life means absolutely nothing to the federal government. And if it can be leveraged anyway to further the government's agenda, they'll be happy to do so. These are really nasty, despicable, reprehensible people who will sell you genocide with a smile on their face, because this ties exactly back to these are the people who are selling missiles and tanks in order to kill children overseas. I bring this example all the time because this to me was the most disturbing example of corporate sociopathy. During the Iraq War, I believe this was on CNN, there was some executive talking about, the upcoming campaign against Baghdad. And they were talking about the shock and awe attack that was going to be imminent. And he said, if you have to ask, it's not shock and awe. And it's like, wait, you're presenting this like, if you have to ask if this is the biggest bouquet you've ever seen, shock and awe means an entire city population, I'm sure many of whom were loyal to Saddam or were bad people. I'm sure many of whom had blood on their hands, but also thousands, if not tens of thousands of children, tens of thousands of innocent people. If they're not terrorized, then we haven't done our job. And he had this big smile on his face, and you knew there was this big whiteboard. And he had sat down with the Department of Defense and talked about how awesome it's going to be, that for 24 hours it would be stronger than the sun, and everyone there would be so terrified they'd be literally crapping their pants and begging for surrender. And it's like, you are literally a demon, selling death and destruction and with a smile on your face, and have no concept of anything remotely close to humanity.
It's crazy that these people get into positions of power.
It's not crazy because it's the same way that child predators are going to go where the children are. They're going to be drawn to where their talents are of use.
We should be skeptical of people and their motivations. I have no doubt that all these politicians adore their family, that they have genuine concerns, that I'm sure they said they want to make the world a better place. If you are comfortable using force to send armed men to harm innocent people, I don't care if you're nice or have good motivations. You are a bad human being.
Now, I always say the corporate press is factual but not truthful. Red pilling is the concept that what is presented as truth by the corporate press is in fact a carefully constructed narrative designed to keep some very unpleasant people in power. And that they do this not hypocritically, accidentally, intentionally, and by design.
Right. Got it.
Would you consider yourself red pilled by that definition?
I'd say I swallowed about 3/4 of that pill.
Okay. Well, there's my other quote, which is you take one red pill, not the whole bottle. So now the other pair of pills is the black pill and the white pill. Okay. Now, the black pill is abandon all hope. We're done. A lot of times this is tied into demographics. There's no way the West can be saved given these current trajectories. The white pill, which is the title of my next book, is the good guys will win. And even if we don't win, we sure better go down fighting. And the concept that the villains who are our contemporaries are impossible to defeat is an absurdity.
And Trudeau, a man who has COVID, has potentially fled Canada due to security concerns about this truckers' protest into the US.
Well, in his defense, if you've got a convoy full of Nazi truckers, as a black man, he's going to have to kind of do a reverse Underground Railroad. Because they'll see his skin and they'll judge him accordingly.
And now what CNN and other outlets had correctly posited as a problem has been resolved, but it's been resolved at their expense. So now the hue and cry is there's misinformation. People are being told dangerous ideas. Yeah, it's dangerous to your hegemony. It's dangerous to your prominence. CNN, Brian Stelter had a whole segment. I don't think he named Tim Pool by name, by saying, how is it that these YouTube shows, news shows, have orders of magnitude bigger than us? What do we do about this? It's like, this is literally every market. Like, I'm a publisher or I make apples. Someone comes along, their apples are, people like those apples better. You know, you don't call in the state. You don't regard this as some kind of abomination against the natural order of things. You're like, okay, crap, what nerve is Tim striking that I can learn from? But they're never interested in that because they're not interested in learning. They're interested in training their audiences what to think and believe. And you see this in social media. I made this joke over the weekend. In the same way that Christians regard the Trinity as one God in three person, you have these entire populations, which is one mind in many, many persons, because the people will watch John Oliver or they'll watch, some other show on the right. And the next day, not only will they be repeating these views, but they're repeating them verbatim. And that is when you realize, oh, there's no mind there. We're trained since we're kids correctly that it's important for us to be informed on current events. So what these shows do very perniciously is they will bring up an issue that person hadn't heard about before, which is important for us to understand, sure, but immediately we'll train them on how to look at this issue and what their correct emotional response is. And people are hungry for that because they want to present themselves as informed, but they don't have the time or the capacity to undertake the critical or independent thought to do that. So it comes prepackaged for them. So it's kind of the TV dinner of the mind.
Now we're told that if you in any way question mob rule, if you in any way question the ruling elite, that you are a threat to our democracy, our sacred, by which of course they mean their oligarchy, right? But
our hegemony. Our hegemony is what they mean. I had that tweet. If you replace our democracy with our hegemony, everything becomes much more clear. And the reason they need it to be hegemonic, they need to have a monopoly on the microphone, because before you and I were born, you had 3 networks and you had ABC, CBS, and NBC. So you had the impression of choice. But these were all strongly left of center anchors presenting things in a strongly left of center context. But it gives the illusion that, oh, I made this decision. I picked B instead of C. I'm an independent thinker. Yeah. This is a big lie. Now, they're still apoplectic that Fox News exists, and they're trying to regain a monopoly control over cable news, while at the same time, fewer and fewer Americans, especially young people, are watching cable news as a means of getting their information at all. They're turning toward the internet and Daily Wire and other podcasts and other resources like that. That's another reason to be enormously optimistic. It's not, people are no longer trying to argue. They're just turning off the television. And if the audience isn't listening to you, it's really hard to control them.
If you talk to a blue pill person, Matthew, and you made a very reasonable, fair point, they would reject it. But if they saw Don Lemon say it, they would repeat it verbatim the next day. That's how it works. They've outsourced their critical thinking capacity. So you're not going to get anywhere, and you're just going to end up getting frustrated.
Like, one of my quotes is, I said, the battle is won when the average American regards a corporate journalist exactly as they regard a tobacco executive. You are never going to have the guy who runs Marlboro be someone that you trust and think is like an unmitigated good person. You understand his job. You might say, look, these have to be legal. It's a horrible habit of, and so on and so forth. And I get how he's getting a paycheck, and I get how it could be used in moderation. But regardless, there's better ways to improve humanity than selling tobacco.
Well, for a long time, the corporate press has been very good at using persuasion. And now that the animus toward them is at all-time highs and hopefully will keep escalating, their mask is dropping and they're demonstrating they're perfectly comfortable using their B move, which is force if necessary. Yeah. This is the tactic of theirs that I've called out. I have a master thread on Twitter. It's called As an Aside. So for example, if I was describing you as someone who's an objective or even biased, let's suppose I'm a biased journalist and I don't like you. Yeah. I would still say Dave Rubin, comma, who's a popular podcaster, comma, said blah, 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 right? That's an accurate framing. Yeah. Their first sentence is always to ascribe the most nefarious framing possible to this person. Right so wing, the reader reader right away knows this is someone to avoid. Joe Rogan, comma, who has a history of making homophobic and racist jokes, comma. If you had to describe Joe Rogan, look at his Wikipedia. That's not what he's known as. MMA, comedian, podcaster. No one would define him that way unless you are telling and training your audience what to think. It's completely disingenuous, and that's the difference between having a bias and having an agenda. If it was a bias, they said Joe Rogan, popular podcast, however, he's gotten controversy for this, you show both sides. That's not what they're doing. They're telling you front and center, this person is the enemy, and you should shun him. And what's beautiful is, look who the corporate press has needlessly alienated through their chicanery. Rogan fans, Tulsi fans, Bernie fans, Andrew Yang fans, Trump fans, Kobe fans, Don Imus fans. It's amazing. They can't help themselves because, again, when you have a fundamentalist faith, you are certain that you're on the side of the angels.
So the main thing that I've taken away from today is that the press themselves are an entity with their own agenda, which,
not a bias, an agenda. Everyone knew that they had a bias. That's inevitable. We're going to have a perspective.
Yes.
That they have an agenda. Because a bias is, okay, I'm going to look at this story from a labor point of view or a liberal point of view, conservative or a Tory point of view, as opposed to, I am writing this story because I want people to feel a certain way. My goal isn't to inform. My goal is to manipulate. My goal is to affect social change.
This whole conservative idea that people who they don't like are also dumb is really one of the stupidest concepts in contemporary discourse. It's a lot easier to train a smart dog than it is to train a dumb one. And many of the people who are putting over some of these extremely malevolent and nefarious ideas, they're very, very bright. There's no question about it.
And the thing is, it's very important. You also remember that in this kind of culture, being a victim is a high status marker. So the more you demonstrate that how you personally are suffering as a consequence of bad people, the more virtuous there accordingly you can claim yourself to be. There is a misconception by conservatives, and I mean American conservatives. I don't know about Tory conservatives in the UK. You know, in America especially, there's different groups that the progressives latch on to further their agenda. Muslim immigrants, it's transgender bathrooms, 1 month or whatever, so on and so forth. And the point I always beat into their heads is they don't really care about these groups. This is just whoever is a useful tool at the moment. And as soon as that group is defiant in any way, they're thrown into the rubbish bin, as you'd say. And it's just a fascinating phenomenon to see. And I think it's just completely transparent how your measure of virtue as an interest group is directly correlated to how useful you are to furthering a certain agenda.
Dude, that's so nailed it.
No one I know would have a problem with a lefty who says, I believe in a welfare state. I don't want to live in a country where people are starving in the street. I don't think someone should be bankrupt because they got cancer. And I want my kids, even if they're destitute, to be able to have a decent quality education. That's the same lefty. That's very different from this kind of fundamentalist faith where overnight, we have to care not only about trans people, but specifically transgender bathrooms. Not any other trans issue. Right. This is the one trans issue. And if you don't care about this one specific sub-issue of this greater issue, you can be read out of polite society. That is coming from a place of domination and control, not a place of empathy and sympathy.
It's these agencies that presume to tell me who I should respect and value. And it's not on my terms. It's on their self-serving terms. You don't need to tell me that Black Lives Matter. I know this. I'm from Brooklyn. And you don't need to tell me literally every 5 seconds. And only we decide all together that they matter this month. And then next week, it's going to be gay history. So trans lives are going to matter. Then we go back to Black Lives Mattering. It's
okay,
like,
so what? Fine.
A lot of people use all these Orwellian 1984 comparisons. And I think the comparison to contemporary terms is much closer to Brave New World. And it's through the use of pleasure and the carrot, because it's a lot cheaper to tell people, persuade people it's in their best interest. Go along. You're going to give up your freedom, but I'm going to give you safety. And they'll be champing at the bit to do that. H.L. Mencken, the great cynic of the early 20th century, said that the average man does not want to be free. He simply wants to be safe. And for those of us who are fans of freedom, who regard liberty as a high value, the issue is, how do you engage in a polity with people who don't really find liberty of use and would rather have every minute of their life, whether through their corporate job or what they watch on TV or what they wear, pretty much decided for them?
You are welcome.